I am the brush that painted the face of the Mona Lisa, Leonardo da Vinci. The year was 1495, when I first came to consciousness in the hands of Benedetto Dei, the finest brushmaker in all of Milan. I was crafted from the tail of a Kalinsky, sable, my hairs selected one by one for their perfect taper and spring. The cold metal ferrule that bound me was polished silver, and my handle was carved from Mediterranean juniper, its grain fine and straight as lines in a master's drawing. Benedetto held me to the light streaming through his workshop window, examining. "The point I formed when wetted, perfectissimo," he whispered, his weathered hands trembling slightly with age. He had made brushes for Bramante, for Mantegna, for artists whose names would echo through eternity. But something told him I was destined for greater things. When Leonardo da Vinci entered the shop that autumn morning, I felt it immediately, a presence unlike any other. His eyes, deep and penetrating as mountain pools, seemed to see not just the surface of things, but their very essence. He was 38 then, his dark hair cascading past his shoulders, his left hand already showing the signs of the ailment that would later force him to paint with his right. "Maestro Leonardo," Benedetto bowed deeply, his voice filled with reverence. "I have something special for you." He presented me with a flourish, and I felt the master's gaze upon me like sunlight after rain. Leonardo picked me up with a touch, so gentle it sent tremors through my bristles. His fingers, stained with a map of past creations, ochre here, ultramarine there, the permanent reminder of his devotion to his art, explored my texture, my weight, my balance. When he dipped me in a cup of water and drew a single perfect line on a piece of parchment, I knew I had found my destiny. "We shall create wonders together, little one," he murmured, and in his voice I heard promises of glory and mystery yet to come. Those first years in Milan were a whirlwind of discovery. I learned the weight of his hand, the rhythm of his work, the way he built images layer by layer, like a composer weaving musical themes. We painted portraits of nobles, frescoes for monasteries, studies of anatomy that pushed the boundaries of knowledge itself. But Leonardo was restless, his mind always seeking new challenges, new mysteries to unravel. In 1499, when French armies marched on Milan and Duke Ludovico Sforza fled, we fled too. The journey to Florence was long and arduous, but I carried within me the memory of every stroke we had made together. I had become more than a tool. I was the keeper of Leonardo's technique, the repository of his evolving genius. Florence in 1500 was a city transformed. The Medici were gone, Savonarola was dead, and the Republic struggled to find its footing between the giants of France and the Papal States. Yet in this uncertainty, art flourished. Competition between masters was fierce, and commissions were hard-won. Leonardo, now 48, carried himself with the dignity of a master who had seen empires rise and fall. Our first years back in Florence were marked by experimentation. Leonardo was fascinated by the interplay of light and shadow, by the subtle gradations that could make a painted face seem to breathe. He developed new techniques, mixing his pigments with oils to achieve effects no one had seen before. I felt these innovations flowing through me, transforming the very nature of how paint met canvas. The commission that would change everything came in 1503 from Francesco del Giocondo, a successful silk merchant. His young wife, Lisa, was to be painted in celebration of their new home and the recent birth of their son. It seemed like any other portrait commission at first, but I sensed something different in Leonardo's approach from the very beginning. The poplar wood panel that would become our most famous creation was prepared with Leonardo's meticulous care. Throughout the spring of 1503, layer after layer of gesso was applied and sanded smooth until the surface gleamed like pearl. I watched him run his fingers across it, testing for imperfections, ensuring that every inch would be perfect for what was to come. Perfection begins with the foundation, he told his assistant Salai, who ground pigments nearby. The ground must be as flawless as fresh snow, for upon it we will build a world. The first sketches began in June. Leonardo drew Lisa's face dozens of times, each attempt capturing a different angle, a different expression. I touched the paper lightly as he worked, leaving faint marks that guided his thinking. He was particularly fascinated by her smile, not the broad, practiced smile of a commission, but something more subtle, more enigmatic. "She has secrets," he observed one morning as we worked on yet another preparatory drawing. "Look how her eyes seem to hold thoughts unspoken." This is what we must capture, not just her appearance, but her spirit. The actual painting began on a morning in early October 1503. The workshop on Via Ghibellina was filled with the hushed expectation that always accompanied the start of a major work. Apprentices had ground the pigments to perfection, ultramarine from Afghanistan, cinnabar from distant mines, ivory black from burned bone. Each color held stories of journeys across continents and civilizations. When Leonardo dipped me into the flesh tone he had mixed for Lisa's face, a complex blend of ochre, white, and the faintest touch of vermilion, I felt the weight of destiny. This first stroke across her forehead was like the opening note of a symphony that would play for eternity. The painting progressed slowly, methodically. Leonardo employed a technique he called sfumato, from the Italian word for smoke. Using me, he built up countless thin, transparent layers, each one barely visible, yet essential to the whole. I became the conduit for this revolutionary approach, allowing him to create gradations so subtle they seemed to merge with the air itself. Lisa posed for us 3 times a week throughout the autumn and winter. She was 24, with a composure that belied her youth. During those long sessions, I felt the connection between artist and subject deepen. Leonardo didn't just paint her appearance. He painted her essence, capturing the play of intelligence in her eyes, the hint of humor at the corners of her mouth. "She thinks in riddles," Leonardo confided to me one afternoon as we worked on the delicate modeling around her eyes. "Each time I believe I understand her, she reveals another layer. We must paint not just what we see, but what remains hidden." The Christmas of 1503 brought snow to Florence, forcing Lisa's visits to become less frequent. But this didn't slow our progress. Leonardo used this time to perfect the background, that mysterious landscape with its winding paths and ethereal mountains. Through me, he created a scene that seemed to exist in memory rather than reality, a dreamscape that perfectly complemented the enigma of her smile. By spring 1504, the fundamental structure of the painting was complete. But Leonardo was far from finished. He had entered what he called the refinement phase, where each session brought minute adjustments that elevated the work from mere representation to transcendent art. I felt the purpose in each stroke now, the way he used me to capture not just physical beauty, but psychological depth. The smile emerged gradually through 1504, built up in layers so thin that each one seemed insignificant. Yet together, they created something magical, an expression that seemed to change depending on how you looked at it, a smile that held all the mystery of womanhood itself. The year 1505 brought profound changes to our work. Leonardo had moved beyond mere portraiture into something approaching alchemy, the transformation of base materials into something that seemed to possess its own life. Through me, he achieved effects that defied understanding, creating passages that seemed lit from within, surfaces that appeared to exist not on the canvas, but floating just above it. Lisa's visits had become a ritual. She would arrive each Tuesday and Thursday morning, taking her position by the north window where the light was most favorable. Leonardo had arranged mirrors to reflect additional light onto her face, eliminating harsh shadows and allowing him to study the subtle play of illumination across her features. During these sessions, I felt like a translator between two languages, the language of light falling on living flesh and the language of pigment suspended in oil. Each stroke required absolute precision, total focus. Leonardo's breathing would slow as he worked, his movements becoming almost meditative. The eye cannot distinguish between that which shines and that which is shine, he murmured one morning as we worked on the gossamer folds of her veil. Through me, he applied paint so thinly it was almost non-existent. Yet these nearly invisible layers gave the fabric its luminous quality. The hands presented their own challenge. Leonardo spent weeks perfecting them, studying the way light played. Across the joints and tendons, he made countless drawings of hands, his own, Lisa's, even those of his assistants, each finding its way into our growing masterpiece. I remember the day he achieved the perfect gradation for her right hand, layer after layer, building up the form with such subtlety that the boundary between paint and air seemed to dissolve. When he finally stepped back, even I could sense his satisfaction radiating through his fingertips. "Touch without contact," he whispered, admiring how the hand seemed to rest on the invisible arm of her chair. "This is the greatest achievement, to show what cannot be shown, to paint the space between things." The clothing required equal attention. The dark dress, which might have seemed simple to the casual observer, contained passages of extraordinary complexity. Through countless glazes, Leonardo created a surface that seemed to absorb light yet reflect it, suggesting the rich fabric while never overwhelming the subtlety of the face. By autumn 1505, visitors had begun to come specifically to see our work in progress. Other artists, collectors, even diplomats would find excuses to visit the workshop, drawn by rumors of what was being created. I felt their awe as they stood before the easel, trying to understand how paint could seem so alive. "It breathes," I heard one Venetian collector whisper to his companion. "You can see her chest rise and fall." Leonardo would smile at such comments but say little. He was approaching 70 now, and time had become precious. Every moment spent on the painting was a race against mortality, a frantic attempt to capture not just one woman's likeness, but some essential truth about humanity itself. The background evolved throughout this period, becoming more atmospheric, more mysterious. Those strange rock formations and distant waters weren't meant to be any specific place. They were a landscape of the soul, a visual poetry that spoke to something deeper than mere recognition. The final months of work, spanning from late 1505 into 1506, were marked by an intensity that bordered on the spiritual. Leonardo's health was beginning to fail. His left hand had developed a tremor that affected his ability to hold a palette. Yet his right hand, the hand that held me, remained steady and sure. Each session now felt like a prayer. Leonardo would arrive at the workshop before dawn, lighting candles and arranging his materials with the reverence of a priest preparing for Mass. When he finally picked me up and began to work, the outside world ceased to exist. The eyes were perfected during this period. Through countless transparent glazes, he gave them a depth that seemed infinite. I felt him searching through layers of paint, as if trying to see into Lisa's soul. The way he built up the iris, the delicate veining of the whites, the subtle modeling of the lids. Each element was crafted with devotion that bordered on obsession. "She must live forever," he told his assistant Marco one morning, his voice barely above a whisper, "not just on this panel, but in the hearts of those who see her." The smile reached its final form in the spring of 1506. After 2.5 years of work, Leonardo declared it complete, not because he had achieved perfection, but because he understood that perfection itself was an asymptote, a limit approached, but never reached. The day he set me down for the last time, after completing the painting, was filled with a bittersweet solemnity. I had been his companion through the creation of what would become the most famous painting in history, yet I sensed our greatest collaboration was ending. "We have done something impossible," he said, cleaning my bristles with tender care. "We have captured a moment that never was yet always is. She will outlive us all." The painting was kept in the workshop for several more months. Leonardo seemed reluctant to part with it, continuing to study it, to discover new subtleties in what we had created. Sometimes I would see him standing before it, not as an artist examining his work, but as a viewer encountering something mysterious and wonderful. When the painting finally left for France with Leonardo in 1516, I remained behind. But I carried within me the memory of every stroke, every decision, every moment of creation. Through me, Leonardo had achieved something that transcended mere representation. He had created a mystery that would endure for centuries. Years passed, decades, centuries. I learned that our Mona Lisa had become the most celebrated painting in the world. She had survived theft, war, and the passages of time. Millions had stood before her, each seeing something different in her enigmatic gaze. Now, as I rest in the collection of a small Florentine museum, I understand the true magnitude of what we accomplished. I was more than a brush. I was the bridge between Leonardo's vision and its physical manifestation. Through me, genius touched eternity. In every art student who studies her technique, in every visitor who stands transfixed by her gaze, in every mystery that surrounds her smile, our creation lives on. For I am the brush that painted the Mona Lisa, and in her immortality I too have found eternal life. The greatest triumph of any tool is not in what it is, but in what it helps create. And in helping birth this masterpiece, I became part of a legend that will outlive stone, outlive canvas, outlive even memory itself. In her smile we captured the eternal mystery of humanity, and in that mystery we found immortality.